I'm County Executive P.J. Wendell. Joining me today is Sheriff James Quatro, our Public Health Director, Christine Schuyler. With us today also are Assemblyman Andrew Goodell and State Senator George Borrello. Along with them in the back is our Director of Emergency Services, John Griffith. As customary, we'll recap the week. On Saturday, May 30th, there were 2 new cases of COVID-19 in Chautauqua County, bringing our total to 24. At that time, we had 21 active cases, and we had received 2,971 negative test results as of that day. On Sunday, there was 1 new case to announce. Monday, we had 2 new cases to report. Tuesday, there was 1 new case to announce, and we began the Phase 2 reopening. Wednesday, there were 2 new cases to report, and yesterday there were 7 new cases to report and 2 additional fatalities. Today, we have 2 new cases to announce, a male and female, both in their 20s. Currently, there are 22 active cases that continue to recover in Chautauqua County. And today, we also have 269 individuals under quarantine or isolation orders by the Public Health Director and continue to be monitored. And there is nobody hospitalized in Chautauqua County with a diagnosis of COVID-19. To date, there have been 71 fully recovered cases and a total of 99 cases aggregately throughout the COVID-19 crisis. Unfortunately, we do report we've had 6 fatalities. A number that has increased quite a bit, almost 1,400 since last week, are the number of negative tests returned to Chautauqua County to an alarming 4,463 tests negative returned to Chautauqua County. In addition to the continued challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, our nation was shocked by the death of George Floyd. I, too, was shocked and disheartened that despite the progress in our country over many decades, these situations still occur. It is clear now that it is time for government leaders to listen with an open heart and an open mind. While some protests across the nation shifted to a tense frustration and some violence, the county was working to coordinate with community leaders to ensure everyone's safety. We always say Chautauqua County is a great place to live, and that is first and foremost because of our citizens who make up our communities. I never doubted we would not be able to come together peacefully, even with our demonstrations, that they would remain peaceful, and we would begin open dialogue with leaders. I'm proud of our community coming together and already beginning a productive conversation with our County Sheriff, Jim Quatro, Jamestown Police Chief Harry Snellings at last Sunday's demonstration. As we're all aware, that Western New York is now included in the Phase 2 reopening of Western New York. This started on Tuesday. This is great news for many local businesses as they were able to reopen and get their feet back on the ground economically. We then received word on Wednesday that outdoor seating at restaurants would be allowed to begin under Phase 2, effective Thursday. Our community is excited to have the option of sit-down restaurant services outdoors, and I'm especially proud of this change by the state because my COVID-19 response team and I discussed this dining outdoors weeks ago, in which I then brought it to the Western New York Control Room, which then made its way to the governor's office in concert with many regions across New York State. After further analysis and conversations, they came through in amending the guidance to allow outdoor dining. I also highlighted the number of changes businesses have implemented across Chautauqua County to safely serve customers, including dirty and clean containers for pens, offering free cloth masks to customers who forgot their own, and posting daily temperatures of their staff. Our local businesses have risen to the challenge from day one, which is why it is important for all of us to make sure we support those who are able to reopen under Phase 2. The county also announced a limited supply of PPE for hairstylists and barbers as salons and barbershops begin to open under Phase 2 as well. These items include face shields and hand sanitizer and can be requested through a PPE request form on the Department of Emergency Services website, shotcofire.org. And I'm also excited to say that we do now have that PPE request form in Spanish also on the shotcofire.org website. We've been coordinating with both the City of Jamestown and the City of Dunkirk to spread the word and assist individuals in submitting these requests. I'm also proud of our community's continuing effort and great work to slowing the spread of the COVID-19 virus. If you watched our numbers in the past weeks, there are a few cases announced each day, but many recoveries also. Since last Friday, we've also received over 1,700 additional negative test results throughout the week. However, yesterday's number of new cases and additional fatalities showed we still need to continue our diligence in social distancing, wearing our face coverings when in public, and good hygiene practices to ensure our numbers continue to trend low and we move closer to that phase 3 reopening. At this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to our Public Health Director, Christine Schuyler.
Thank you, County Executive Wendell. As the County Executive said, we have had a lot of negative test results come back. A lot of this can be attributed to the increased number of testing that's happening, especially within essential businesses, including testing of nursing home staff. He also mentioned that we did have 2 fatalities this week. First of all, our condolences go out to the families of those 2 elderly gentlemen who passed. They were both in their 80s and had underlying health conditions. Despite extensive treatment, they were unable to overcome their illness. That reminds us that it's really important to take extra precautions to protect your health. If you have an underlying condition like diabetes, heart disease, or respiratory disease, and really important to keep our germs to ourselves. Doing all of these things like washing our hands frequently and covering our noses and mouths and social distancing really helps protect those who are the most vulnerable and the most at risk of complications of COVID-19. Unfortunately, the inconsistent and confusing messaging from the federal and state levels throughout this pandemic has been very problematic for those of us in public health at the local level. As a local health official, I implore you to listen to the messages that we put out because we have the best grasp of the conditions here in Chautauqua County. We have a low prevalence of disease. We've had a low prevalence of death here. I've attributed that to effective community mitigation efforts and the rural nature of this area. I've also always openly said that as we reopen, we will see further spread of COVID-19. We have continually warned against the dangers of mass gatherings, and I continue to stand by that message. We should have learned that lesson from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. Within a week of a war bond parade in Philadelphia during the pandemic, 45,000 people were infected, and within a month, more than 10,000 were dead. COVID-19 doesn't care whether you're gathering closely together it does not care what you're gathering closely together for. Given the chance to ride a droplet from one person to another, the virus will do so. Whether those people are in close quarters, at work, at church, at a party, at a wedding, or at a protest. Please don't allow the protests that are now going on to completely drown out our public health messaging on COVID-19. I don't care who you are. Continue to wash your hands frequently. Use hand sanitizer when you're not able to wash your hands. Wear a face covering when you're out in public or when you're not able to stay 6 feet away from other people. And continue to do the social distancing as we've asked you to do. It seems like everything we're running into is a public health crisis. We've gone from a pandemic, we've seen an increase in substance abuse and overdoses, domestic violence, police brutality, racism. But what really are the common denominators for the crises that we're facing? The social determinants of health, the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and the wider set of forces and systems shaping the conditions of daily life. If we really want to solve or prevent a problem for the long term, we have to deal with its root causes. If we want to address those root causes, you're more likely to successfully address the issue in the short term as well. Despite a wide range of efforts to improve the health and quality of life of those who are socially and economically disadvantaged, very little progress has been made in reducing our social gaps. These disparities are costly to society in so many ways, and we're seeing that played out throughout our nation at this time. Major social change takes not a single type of intervention, but many collaborative interventions on a number of social factors over a long period of time. This is not anything, has nothing to do with not having enough resources. It's about having the political will to affect change. Together, With a multi-pronged, multifaceted, collaborative approach, we can truly affect change. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Chautauqua County Sheriff Jim Quatro.
Thank you, Mr. Wendell. I kind of wanted to reaffirm what Mrs. Schuyler's talked about. With the protests going on, other gatherings going on, we still are at risk of spreading this virus. I'm happy to say, first of all, that the protests that we've seen in Chautauqua County the last week have been peaceful, where there's been a great dialogue shared, and also that the majority of the people that I saw were wearing face coverings, and we're just going to continue to encourage that. But as we look at the issues, whether it's the pandemic, the drug epidemic, the protests, to me, the common denominator to help with all of this is an unconditional respect for each other. We need to be shown respect back and forth, whether that's covering our mask or respecting somebody's right not to wear a mask for whatever reason that might be, but act in a peaceful way. When we're sharing at these protests, we can share this dialogue back and forth, and part of that communication is not only talking, we need to listen to what's being said by the other people that are out there. So again, I encourage this continual conversation, continual dialogue, practicing this unconditional respect of each other and of mankind, and to keep that going.
Thank you. This time, we'll also turn the microphone over to John Griffith, our Director of Emergency Services.
Thank you, County Executive Wendell. Just to reassure that the Office of Emergency Services is still working to make sure that businesses and government agencies have proper PPE equipment as needed. We do have hand sanitizer, we do have masks. We will continue to work to deliver them as requested as we get those from the state of New York, the federal government. I also would like to mention to the first responders in the area, please do not let your guard down. As we've talked about and you've heard today, COVID-19 is still here. It's still prevalent. It's going to be here, and it's going to be prevalent in the community. Continue to wear your PPE. Continue to be strong. Continue to do the job you're doing, and thank you very much for your service. Thank you, Mr. Wendell.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to speak a little bit about our invited guests here that have changed their schedule to be with us this afternoon. Today we have Senator George Borrello and Assemblyman Andrew Goodell joining us for the press conference. Senator Borrello and Assemblyman Goodell have been in touch with my office throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, through all hours of the day and evening, and have been leaders for our area developing a regional reopening plan that was then reviewed and ultimately adapted by the governor's office for a statewide reopening. As we progress through the reopening phase, they continue to advocate for our county and our businesses. A new challenge for counties has arisen, and local governments are facing the same challenge. The state is withholding federal intended monies for local governments. On a New York State Association of Counties call, NYSAC, last evening, counties questioned about the delay of federal funding for public assistance programs, child care, highways and CHIPS funding, and many others that were answered by the governor's office by the quote, "We didn't know they wanted the money because nobody has said they wanted it." I will go on record for the governor's office. I would like all of the money that is entitled to Chautauqua County. From day one I took office, the Medicaid reimbursement, or FMAP funding, was supposed to be and was a bipartisan effort, collaborated by county executives and gotten to the governor's office. That money is owed to Chautauqua County. I am asking the governor to send that to us. I'm also asking for the over $160 million earmarked for child care throughout New York State to please get that money to the rightful people so they can continue their child care services and increase them wherever possible. Also, the money from the federal government that has been allotted to our local municipalities, counties, towns, and villages. If it is not concerning, I am asking now, we would like the money that is supposed to go to Chautauqua County. I am not sure that we should have had to ask that, but that message is coming from Chautauqua County that I am requesting the monies owed to us be returned to us. We always send in our Medicaid funding on the time that it's due, even though we're not asked. So I want to reiterate the fact, please, Governor Cuomo, we are asking for the money, so it is very clear that the request has been made. At this time, I'd like to turn the microphone over to our State Senator, George Borrello.
Thank you, County Executive Wendell. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for your engagement. We have talked on a daily basis and communicated in so many ways. I appreciate the collaborative effort, not just here in Chautauqua County, but throughout this region. You have also communicated with a lot of others in the region, and that has really helped us to be proactive. I think that's critically important right now. We have, I believe, led the way here in Chautauqua County and throughout this region to, number one, to use common sense first and foremost. We asked our businesses to put together good common sense plans for reopening. We've asked our residents to remain diligent, and that has paid dividends in so many ways. So again, thank you for your leadership on that. I think ultimately now we are looking at how do we continue to move forward? We all understand, the danger that still is out there, but at the same time, we have to be able to address the long-term damage that a continued shutdown will wrought on our area. So we need to continue to be smart as well as diligent. And when it comes to the funds, not only do you have a current county executive, but you have two former county executives in the room here. So we understand the tenuous relationship between the state and local governments at times. And I do believe that the request that you've now formally made should not have been necessary. There are so many things. If we want to restart our economy, what are the foundations? What are the building blocks that we need? We need things like the money for child care that you spoke about. Without child care, we will not be able to get not just our essential workers back to work, but everyone else that is starting to come back to work and starting to once again contribute to the engine of our economy. There are so many other funds out there that should be allocated, but also we need clarity. I believe, as Christine mentioned, it's vague and often contradictory, and I will say also often hypocritical. The way that we have been asked to reopen. I still go back to the fact that up until recently, you could walk into any big box store, but you couldn't walk into a retailer. And we will learn the public health lessons from that one way or the other. But at the same time, from a policy standpoint, I think the best thing I can say, it has been inconsistent. So we need consistency. And that is the only way we're going to build up confidence, because ultimately it's up to the people of our communities to have the confidence that the people that are supposed to be leading this also understand the impact and also have a good grasp of the outcomes. And that's the only way people are going to have confidence in us as both leaders and servants, public servants. I think everyone at times is trying their best. But at the same time, it also becomes gauging the political temperature of things when decisions are made, and that's not appropriate in my opinion. So we will continue to be diligent and push forward. We will continue, and I think Senator Goodell will say the thing, we will continue to advocate for those things that our region needs in order to continue to move forward. But ultimately, it's up to each and every individual in this county and in this region to ensure that we don't slide backwards. So please be safe. Please use common sense and let us all continue to move forward safely. So thank you again for asking us to be here.
Thank you. At this time, we'll also turn the microphone over to Assemblyman Andy Goodell.
Thank you, County Executive, and thank you for your leadership throughout this crisis, along with your team, your Commissioner of Health, who's done a phenomenal job, and Director of Emergency Services, and the rest of your team. This has been a team effort right from day one, and our effectiveness reflects that teamwork and that communication, whether it's Congressman Tom Reed, who has regular updates and conference calls and has been focusing on getting funding directly to Chautauqua County and local governments, to Senator Borrello and myself, your team, of course, and local municipalities. But the team effort doesn't stop on government side. It includes all of our businesses, our manufacturers, retailers, and others. So when our county executive asked manufacturing and business owners to start putting together reopening plans, they put together comprehensive, thoughtful, careful planning that would enable them to reopen. And initially, we were sending those plans to the state. The state said, oh, don't send those plans to us. We're not ready to reopen. And then 2 weeks later, they said, oh, we need all those plans now. And so, County Executive, you and your team were ahead of the curve, and planning ahead is a hallmark of a great leader. As we move to reopen, there are, of course, people that are still concerned about contacting the virus and becoming sick, and that's a legitimate concern. The number of active cases we have in our county are higher than they have been for many weeks. And so it is extremely important, even as we reopen, that we follow those safety protocols. And when we follow those safety protocols, what we're really doing when we're wearing a mask in public is showing respect and courtesy to those who are around us. And that goes back to Sheriff Quatrone's comment that our county will be much safer, healthier, and better the more we respect our friends and neighbors and those around us. Clearly, though, our focus on reopening reflects the fact that the longer we stay closed, the more likely that locally owned businesses will be unable to reopen. And so this is an effort to help our friends and our neighbors that work at local manufacturing plants or work at local businesses, to help those friends and neighbors keep their job and to improve the employment outlook for our young people into the future. That's another part of this equation, helping our friends and our neighbors keep their job and keep their opportunities. And another part of that equation is trying to restore the economic activity that funds critical services throughout our county. These are the sales tax revenues and the bed tax revenues that pay for cleaning the lake and pay for our essential services and help offset the cost of our government. And so when we push to reopen, we're pushing to reduce your property taxes looking into the future. Underlining that respect that Sheriff Quatrone mentioned, I have to say personally that I was very proud of the way our county responded to the situation, that horrific situation involving Floyd Fuller, because the demonstrations that we had in our county were respectful. They were strong, they were clear, they were unequivocal, but it did not involve the burning or the destruction of other people's property. And I'm encouraged that we have the ability to walk that line about being frustrated and upset without becoming violent. Senator Borrello and I have jointly written letters to the governor asking for the full release of child care funding. There's no excuse why that funding hasn't been released, and the request has been made in writing weeks ago. Yesterday, I joined with many of my colleagues requesting the immediate release of CHIPS funding, our highway funding. The governor in a press conference noted that we need to start the economy, and one way to do it is invest in our infrastructure. And so we wrote to him and said, great idea, how about releasing all the money so we can do so? And we're hopeful that that will proceed as needed. The federal government has provided billions of dollars of state aid to the state, specifically to help local governments as well as state government itself. Those funds should not be bottlenecked in Albany. They need to be distributed so that we can proceed as quickly as possible. And again, I thank everyone for their patience, their continued focus on safety and diligence, and I am so proud of our residents who are working together in a cooperative manner, showing respect and sensitivity as we move as quickly as we can to restore our economy, help our friends and neighbors, restore the tax revenues that provide essential services, and do so in a safe manner. Thank you, County Executive, and thank you to your team.
I, too, would like to thank Congressman Reed, who has been in constant contact with my office at any time of the day or evening, whatever questions we had, and the diligent work he has put forth from the New York State caucus of congresspersons to get the funding we need, and they do not stop working very tirelessly. So thank you, Congressman Reed and his staff. At this time, we're going to open up questions to the media. Again, as I've said before, we do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock, so I could once again in the control room request the funds that are owed to us. But at this time, we're going to limit questions today to 2 apiece. And if there's time, we'll open it up again. So at this time, we'll start with Mr. Dave O'Connor from Shawkat.
Well, thank you, PJ. First question to Assemblyman Goodell. You then disagree with Governor Cuomo that the federal government has not been giving aid to New York State. That's one of his chief complaints day after day.
Well, with all fairness to the governor, he has acknowledged that the federal government has provided the state of New York with billions of dollars. And I believe that number is close to $12 billion at this point in time. The governor, though, believes the federal government should give even more money to the state, because even with the massive multi-billion-dollar federal support that we've gotten through the multiple CARES Act and legislation, New York is still facing a huge operating deficit. Now, you may recall we started the year with a $6 billion operating deficit. COVID, even with the federal aid, pushed that operating deficit up into the range of $10 billion. And to be accurate, it wasn't the expenses of COVID that pushed it up to $10 billion. It was the governor's decision to shut down the economy, which then resulted in a free fall in sales tax revenue and income tax revenues, which fund state government. So we are now having to wrestle with the loss of revenue as we move forward. So, the governor is clear he wants a federal bailout to cover the lost revenue that resulted from his shutdown of the entire state's economy for nearly 3 months. But the governor himself recognizes that New York State has received billions of dollars in aid already.
Thank you. Morello, when you, as a Republican, along with Assemblyman Goodell, talk to the governor or people in the hierarchy, do you feel that Republicans now as a minority are shut out from decision-making?
Well, I would say this, that there's certainly not a lot of openness and transparency, but there is dialogue. And I think you can see that, we have advocated, the plan that Assemblyman Goodell and I put forward. There was never any official recognition that our plan became part of what ultimately was the state's plan, but I'm proud of the fact that we were proactive. We put that plan forth. And it was, as they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So I'm proud of the fact that ultimately became 90% of what the governor ended up putting out as the plan for the state's reopening. There are certainly other situations where we can point to how policies have changed and how when it had come to whether it's the public advocacy that we have done or just the private advocacy that we do behind the scenes. So you might say that even though we are in the minority, that just like in any other time in your life, sometimes being in the squeaky wheel is the important thing. So I believe that we have had an effective impact on state policy. I believe that we've done an effective job of keeping together and uniting as a group. There's strength in numbers, and that as a result has changed how things are happening here in New York State, I would say dramatically. So, on paper, you may not look at it as something that has had an impact, but I think if you look at the results, you'll see that the results are there.
Let me give you 3 specific examples. Senator Umbrello and I sent in a plan to the governor calling for a regional reopening. 3 or 4 days after we sent it in, he switched his position, which used to be all or nothing statewide, and announced it would be a regional reopening. We set forth the parameters for that reopening, and he quoted our memo, the exact phraseology that was in our memo. I'll give you another example. Senator Umbrello and I sent in a detailed analysis on which businesses ought to open in which phases and why. And attached to that memo, as an example, were the safety precautions that were being taken by Chautauqua Institution upon the reopening of their outdoor tennis courts. 2 days later, in a press conference, the governor announced that we would be moving forward, and he specifically mentioned outdoor tennis courts. I'll give you a third example. Last Wednesday in the state legislature was legislation dealing with the non-forbearance, if you will, of mortgage payments that only applied to state chartered banks. We pointed out on the floor of the legislature, I did and my colleagues, that as written, that legislation would likely bankrupt a number of our state chartered banks. These are the small community-based banks. The very next day was the governor's sponsored bill that corrected that language and made it absolutely clear that none of the mortgage forbearance requirements could be used to threaten the financial solvency of a state chartered bank. And so, over and over, we make good ideas. We do so in a nonpartisan manner, and I'm confident, based on the reaction, that our ideas are being heard and implemented. Not always, because we'd start a lot sooner and a lot different, but certainly we're having an impact.
Moving on, Mr. Dennis Phillips from the Post-Journal.
Through this Forward New York website, if it's known how many businesses were able to open yesterday, restaurants with outdoor seating.
That number exactly for restaurants that were able to open, I'm not quite sure of, but I know yesterday we had 54 businesses sign their electronic affirmation. Today there were 38. So I feel very proud that our business leaders are taking the steps necessary to open. They do not have to submit the safety plans. They are to have them on hand, but they are to file or sign the electronic affirmation, and we've had over 80 businesses do that in the last 2 days, so I commend all of our business leaders for that.
Do you believe those were all phase 2 businesses that did that?
If I were to have an educated guess, yes, because many of our previous businesses have had 2 weeks to file those electronic affirmations already. So I'm quite confident that the newest additions have been our phase 2 openings. I've been excited that we proposed that new change to the outdoor seating. So my guess is the number of businesses I've heard that have opened and seen opening, that they would do the right thing responsibly and get their businesses affirmed so they can open.
And in phase 3, restaurants will be able to open inside. If you could talk a little bit about the guidelines that people that work for the restaurant and people who want to eat at the restaurant will most likely have to follow.
Those guidelines I have not seen in detail yet. A lot of this time the details come out a little bit later, whether that's going to be based on what we're seeing from the outdoor dining as it is now. I have not seen any sort of reduction in indoor capacity. I'm sure limited space will have a lot to do with that. But, as we are with outdoor seating, even when you are not seated, it's required that the patrons wear masks until they sit down to dine. So I'm sure that will be the case when we move indoors. But that information, as soon as it is out, I will draw attention to that for our local businesses and make sure that they're aware of this as they move forward.
Thank you, PJ.
Yep. Moving on, WDOE, Mr. Dave Rowley.
PJ, just continuing along the line on phase 3, should businesses start getting prepared, those businesses that would be eligible under phase 3, should they be getting ready to get their plans together? I know Lieutenant Governor Hochul, we interviewed her the other day, and she indicated indoor dining may be part of phase 3. So should restaurants start thinking about that?
Oh, certainly. I spoke with one restaurateur, actually from Davidson's Restaurant, who said she's been ready and waiting to open. Her plans are there. She's waiting to see what details have to be met before they sign that affirmation. But I'm sure that's just one person. I know the rest of the establishments that are able to have indoor dining will be ready. And I also ask any business. I know, my previous career had been in health and physical education, and I know several gym owners have approached me. The front page of yesterday's paper addressed the same issue. The Lieutenant Governor said early on that if you do not see your business specifically in any phased opening, to be prepared to enter at any other phase. So right now, if gyms haven't opened in phase 2, that they should be ready for phase 3. I don't believe they're listed specifically, but there has been guidance, and that guidance could change, as we saw with outdoor dining. And I will strongly advocate for our fitness centers, as health is a good way for not only physical health, but also our emotional and mental health as well. So I'm going to be strongly advocating for those establishments to be open. They know how to take care of health and safety. They know how to be clean and sanitized. So I will, advocate for them. But any business that is not open yet, when you're looking to phase 3, should be planning now. Preparation will always bring about success.
I also want to get people's reaction. I know we had that police-related injury in Buffalo. I know there's a lot of debate, a lot of comment coming from state and federal representatives regarding that incident. The governor today indicating that he has come out with reform, a reform agenda, say their name reform agenda. Today, I know there were 4 provisions in it, including banning the use of chokeholds. I didn't know if anyone had reaction to that legislation. He was indicating he is trying to get the state legislature possibly to go into session this coming week to deal with that agenda.
Sure, Dave. From the perspective of law enforcement, I quite honestly wish the governor would perhaps speak with law enforcement to find out about our trainings that we do have. New York State is well ahead of the curve, I believe, of law enforcement across this nation. And we have extensive training in community relations, extensive training in anti-racism, recognizing implicit bias. We have requirements on the proper use of force, as well as training in that area. And it's something that we are working towards and continue to work that. We police ourselves. We encourage each other. If we see another officer doing something out of the norm or something that is dangerous to other people, we do encourage our officers. And matter of fact, there is legislation in place right now that requires us to step in and interfere with an officer who is doing something that's improper. I quite honestly feel that the governor is posturing here in trying to reach out to a base that will be supporting him in that.
Okay, didn't know if George or Andy, if you had reaction to this call for legislation.
Yes, Dave. First and foremost, I would say that the governor is making this call now, but actually legislation has already been proposed by the majority, and there was already a call from the majority to come back to Albany. So, we've had this legislation in our hand for a couple days now. But I actually sat down, with members of law enforcement to talk about some of the legislation that's been proposed. And most of it is either items that are recycled from some of the bail reform initiatives that were brought forth last year, where they're now bringing it forward, I think, in an effort to take advantage of this current unrest. And the rest of it was, again, because as the sheriff said, they didn't consult with law enforcement when they drafted it, are things that are either already in place that apparently those that drafted this legislation were not aware of, or things that are just ultimately not effective in any manner. So I think that again, I've said this before. The phrase "never let a crisis go to waste." I think that's the philosophy right now when you see why they're bringing us back to Albany. Here we are. We were back last week, and we're going to be back next week, and we have yet to address critical issues, the shuttering of small businesses that will never reopen. I've been calling, along with my colleague Andy Goodell and others, for common sense assistance, like holding harmless businesses that are going to experience a huge increase in the cost of unemployment insurance as a result of the sudden shutdown of our economy and the poor decisions that were made on how people would be compensated that ultimately resulted in a lot more unemployment claims. So these things that are going to help our families, help our small businesses, help to ensure that those businesses would actually be able to reopen, have not been addressed at all in Albany. Instead, it's been this grandstanding agenda that we're going to see more of next week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, moving on. Media One, Terry Frank.
Yes, good afternoon, folks. I wanted to go back to the discussion about the state and the Mother May I situation about funding. The $12 billion that the state has received from the federal government. How much of that would you estimate is Chautauqua?
Terry, you got cut off. Could you repeat the end of the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Just wanted to know with regards to the federal funding that went to the state and the money that's owed to Chautauqua County regarding CHIPS, the child care, et cetera. How much money, how much of that $12 billion is Chautauqua County?
Well, I think part of that, too, is the FMAP money, and those numbers are kind of revolving. The CHIPS money is several $100,000, and the child care, I know there is, Christine might be able to add to it, there's reimbursement from the state for that. So the exact figure, don't have that off the top of my head, but I think what was more astounding was the statement from our governor that, and even Senator Schumer, who has worked tirelessly for New York to get the federal funding, they didn't know that the counties requested the money or the counties needed the money. I want to make sure that it's known the counties do want whatever money is owed to us. We pay them our Medicaid monies, I believe, every Tuesday, and we've not missed a payment, but yet the state has not repaid us. So the formal number, I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, but I was told last night that they're unaware that we want that money, so I wanted to make it sure today, and I will again at our 4 o'clock control room. I've already reached out to my colleagues in Cattaraugus and Allegheny County, and we will again reiterate the fact that we would appreciate the governor sending those funds that are owed to us as we requested them.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, and I have a quick question for Christine regarding the 7 new cases from yesterday. I had heard that several of those people were all members of a family or an extended family. Was this a community spread situation, or what can you tell us about that?
Well, as you know, Terry, I can't give information about specific cases, but I am comfortable in saying that most of the cases that we are seeing now are related to a known positive case. So that really doesn't indicate community spread as much as it does just from close contact of people being, whether it's in the same family or household or closely related to each other. So we are seeing where that close contact is popping up with additional positive cases.
All right. Thank you.
And Terry, just to add, sorry, John, a little bit on that, people might start hearing about some labs coming back with presumptive positives, and that's a term that means the RNA of the virus has been detected in the sample, and we presume it to be positive. And according to CDC and state guidance, we treat that presumptive positive as a positive and act accordingly. And families out there should also be aware that there is a regulation in New York State that if any staff or resident of a nursing home tests positive for COVID-19, they will be notified. So if anyone hears rumblings of anything like that, I want them to know that they will be informed if they're a family member.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Moving on, Western New York News Now, Justin Gould.
Good afternoon, everybody. My question for County Executive Wendell and Director Schuyler, in regards to the protests that we're seeing around Western New York and here in Chautauqua County, we have several scheduled for this weekend. Do you fear that we could see a spike in cases because of that, and then subsequently a step backwards in the reopening effort? We've had a lot of people reach out to us who are concerned about that.
Yes, I do think there's going to be an increase in cases. I think what we're seeing nationwide, we've already got the areas, urban areas that have been hotspots for virus that we're still having a lot of cases. And now with disregard for social distancing and measures that we've all been talking about, I do think we'll probably see a second wave of virus a lot sooner than any of us thought we were going to. I don't know that for a fact, but it certainly seems to make sense. There's also a good chance that if people are not abiding by social distancing recommendations locally at these protests, we probably will see more cases again. Remember why we went into quarantine and why we were shutting everything down was so that we didn't overwhelm our healthcare system with having so many people sick at the same time. Hopefully we're out of the woods on that. And we'll be able to handle an increase in cases that we could see stemming from people gathering together at these protests at this time. Whether or not it sets us back is a question for the governor. He's the one really who's dictating the phases of reopening that we go into. So that really isn't something at the local level that we will have the ability to make a call on.
Christine, and I want to give the executive a second to respond to that first question, but is there any advice that you give to people who say, I'm so passionate about this, I really need to go out? What advice do you give them?
Be smart. It's a very difficult position for public health because it feels like everything we've been talking about has gone down the drain every time you turn on the television and you see all these people gather together. And that's not the case. The disease is still out there. So more people are going to get sick. It's just the way that it is. And we've had a very low prevalence here. And the people who are testing positive for antibodies is very low here. So someone just asked me the other day if I thought the worst was over and are we through this? And I honestly don't know. None of us do. But in reality, based on our disease prevalence and our antibodies, I don't think we've had a lot of it here yet. So once people start getting back together and closely gathering, and especially if we have people coming from outside of this area and being part of these protests and possibly bringing more disease to us from metro areas, I think we are going to see an increase in disease. And that means a real big increase in public health work that goes along with it. So I ask that people use some common sense and be reasonable. And please don't be violent.
To respond to that question, Justin, many of the reports that I've been told and seen from the demonstrations last weekend, people did have their face covering, and we're being proactive in abiding by the measures that we've asked. As we've always said before, anytime you have any groups and gatherings, there could be a potential for spread of the disease, and this still holds true. One of the things that I think is, to answer the question, we've looked at these metrics, and we look at them daily. Dr. Michael Kane from the UB School of Medicine is our epidemiologist on our control room, as a request from actually myself and several others to have a medical professional on our staff. So again, we're looking at those numbers, and although we've seen a spike, we don't have any hospitalizations, and that's the metric we're looking at, and those are the metrics we're going to continue to look at throughout this. But as far as stepping back, we don't see those numbers yet. We feel our numbers are low enough that even with some spikes and some upticks, we're still within those, well within those boundaries, and we monitor them every day. That control room meets daily, and the first question that comes out from Lieutenant Governor Hochul is, Dr. Kane, how do we look on those numbers? So I feel confident that our control room will monitor those and take any measures that we need to as we move forward.
I see. So for just clarification, the reason we shut down was because we didn't want to overwhelm the hospitals and the healthcare workers. So as long as we keep those facilities able to handle any potential hospitalizations and we keep the hospitalization number down, we can more than likely continue to reopen.
Yep, that's how we're seeing it.
And we have to remember, we were talking about underlying health conditions and the elderly, those with diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, COPD. Those are people who are most at risk for the complications, for the terrible pneumonia, for the renal failure, for all of the other complications that go along with COVID-19. So those are the people that's why we protect those people, because they're going to get the sickest, they're going to end up in the hospital, they're going to end up, many of them sadly can't fight this off. And if you want to then correlate that to the numbers, those are the people that tend to get hospitalized. I don't want this to just be about numbers. I want this to be about the health and the safety of our community and having that respect, as the sheriff said, for one another and taking care of one another at this time. We've come so far in fighting off a pandemic. We can't allow of what's going on now to set us back completely in so many ways. We really need to start getting down to the root causes of what's going on in our nation.
And then if I have time for one more question, Executive Wendell, I know we only have 5 more minutes, but I wanted to talk more about the PPE that's available for businesses in the county. Specifically with hair salons, we had some reach out to us who actually, Fringe Hair in Jamestown, made us privy to an email exchange with you talking about how some hair salon owners were under the assumption that maybe they didn't have to have face shields necessarily and that the face masks were okay. And those hair salons we talked to said they were confused based on the governor's guidelines because that forward.ny site is updated so often and things change, and they wrote their own plan. For those guidelines, what do we know right now? Do salons have to have face shields?
I asked a question yesterday. The guidance that came out from the Department of State said you must have a face covering. It did not say face covering and a face shield. The guidance from forward.ny.gov required a face shield and a face covering. I asked that question of John Majori, our contact in the governor's office. I asked him again this morning. He has not gotten direct guidance. So as soon as I get that direct guidance, I will get that out to the establishments, because it was confusing. Their licensing department said they didn't need it, and Forward says they did need it. So we want to make sure that that's clarified, and I will get that information out as soon as I get it.
Has been working to get PPE supplies for businesses out there who maybe need assistance, because when you look at this pandemic, they've been closed for so long, they don't have any money to buy shields and masks and things like that. Are they able to get that through the county at no charge?
Yep. Please go to Chautauqua, CHAUTCO, fire, all one word, .org. As we said today, there's a PPE request form that's fillable. You can fill that out in English or in Spanish now. Get that to our emergency services director, and we will get that PPE to you.
How many supplies that we have right now?
John, do you want to?
We have an adequate amount of hand sanitizer in stock right now. We have an adequate number of masks, and we put a request into New York State for another drop shipment of masks and PPE. We have an adequate supply of face masks and face shields at this time right now. We anticipate probably some more of the businesses as things open up, making contact with us. We'll continue to distribute as long as we have the stuff, and we have faith in the state of New York and our partners that they'll keep us supplied.
Then, sir, the supplies are coming from New York State?
They come through a system called New York Response, which comes through the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, and are drop shipped to the different counties as they get it into the statewide stockpiles.
I think from the public health perspective, we have continued to say, if you cannot stay more than 6 feet away, wear a cloth face covering.
PJ, what's that URL for getting supplies against shot fire?
Chautauqua fire,
How is that spelled?
CHAUTCO, fire, all one word.
B-U-Y-E-R?
Fire, as Chautauqua County Fire is what it's, so it's abbreviated SHOT for Chautauqua County Fire. You got it, .org.
And then I know it's 58, but we had people who were concerned with garage sales. Is that still not recommended?
Well, Justin, with all due respect, we do have, Jason's on the other line, and we do have to get.
Oh,
get to
I'm sorry, I didn't know
WRFA.
Mr. Sample was
That's
there.
okay. Jason, do you have any questions from WRFA? Are you on mute, Jason? Anything from WRFA? Okay, he may have left us. At this time, the guidance on garage sales themselves are still what they're called an unessential gathering of 10 or more. So at this time, there are estate sales allowed, 10 people in a household, but for the garage sales, that's the guidance we've had, and that has not changed since the beginning. I appreciate everybody's attendance today. Again, we're moving forward. I appreciate our state representatives, Senator Borrello and Assemblyman Goodell, for attending today and providing some information as well. Moving forward, again, this is an ever-changing situation, and we will keep you abreast of the changes as they come. If you're not listed in a phased opening businesses, I urge you to be prepared as we are going to hopefully get you open as soon as we can. But as a tradition, we've changed our slogan a little bit. Instead of staying home, we want people to get out and about and supporting our local businesses, especially our outdoor dining facilities. So from my office, I would like you to stay healthy and stay safe, and throughout this, we will continue to be CHQ strong. Thank you.